Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint Netcast number 168, recorded live Monday, August 26th, 2013. I am your host and a potential candidate for the job of CEO at Microsoft, Todd Klindt. But until that job comes through at Microsoft, because we'll talk about that later, I'm still working for Rackspace. They're the ones who sponsor all of this, and they've sponsored my downloads. They got me all this fancy equipment, and all my stuff is hosted from Rackspace servers. So if you have SharePoint hosting needs or any other kind of hosting needs, you just can't go wrong by talking to the guys at Rackspace. So talk there, and to find out about all the crazy cool SharePoint stuff we've got, go to sharepoint.rackspace.com. You can find out about training and hosting and consulting. Everything, all the news that's fit to print about SharePoint is at sharepoint.rackspace.com. All the cool kids are going there, sharepoint.rackspace.com. Right, we will spend a couple of minutes talking about production notes. The audio in 167 was scratchy, and that's all my fault, folks. I made a mistake. That happens when I get the USB bus overloaded on my little rig here. I cranked it up, stoked those steam engines, but I had everything on the same USB port, and so once I started recording, everything wouldn't share, and my microphone lost out. So this week I did a couple of tests. The folks in the chat room have verified that the audio is good, sultry, and not crackly. So the audio this week should be good. The video should be good. I really have no excuses. Also, the 168 is on YouTube now, but I haven't updated the RSS feed or any of that stuff. I'll do that tonight or tomorrow, but I am a week behind on that. But that is kind of leading up. I try to space these out. Next week is Labor Day here in the U.S. It's the something of September. It's a holiday. I plan on being busy, being drunk on hamburgers and lemonade. So there will not be a netcast next week, but I'll probably maybe publish this one sometime later this week, kind of space them out a little bit. But no netcast next week. For all of my American viewers, go out and have some fun with your family. Celebrate the end of summer. For my foreign, the viewers that are not in the U.S., go do something fun. The chat room is telling me that Rosh Hashanah is also next week. So if you're a big Rosh Hashanah reveler, go out and do whatever folks do on Rosh Hashanah. And now that I've went ahead and offended much of my audience, we'll go on to the next section of the netcast. For topics this week, we've got quite a bit of things. I would be remiss to not discuss the big one that is on the tip of everybody's tongue. You can't open up a blog, you can't read Twitter, you can't look at any news that talks about that without seeing that Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, has agreed to resign, or has said he's going to resign within the next 12 months. So this is for the SharePoint crowd, probably not a huge deal. He's a couple levels away from SharePoint. The decisions that they make for SharePoint are kind of isolated from him by a couple layers. But just from a Microsoft view, it's kind of a big deal, and it's kind of a big deal for a couple of reasons. Number one is because he had said that he didn't plan on resigning until his youngest child started college, and that was going to be in like 2018 or something like that. And as you know, for all of us who have good calendar reading skills, it's not 2018 yet, so that's a little bit ahead of time. And Microsoft's had a few stumblings lately, and so there's some speculation that it's all because of that. I will say that I remember having a conversation with Joel Olson 5 years ago, maybe, 2008 probably, and he was talking then about how bad he didn't like Ballmer and how Ballmer needed to step down because of the stock price and things like that. And I remember talking to Joel then and saying, I don't own individual stocks, so that doesn't bother me. But Microsoft has done really well since he took over in 2000, 2001, something like that. And now, 5 years later, we can quote stocks or quote stats like, revenue has increased 3 times under his tenure. Profit has doubled under his tenure. So for a guy who's such a terrible CEO, the company's not doing bad. And in our little neck of the woods, SharePoint's come out. SharePoint's done huge. So I know there's a lot of press out there that are taking this great opportunity to bash on Ballmer, and the guy's done pretty well. So, but I had to mention that because it's just been a big thing. Everywhere I turn, every Netcast is talking about it. Every blog got a thing about it. My Skype and everything and Twitter was just blown up on Friday about it. So that'll be good. Steve, if you want to do an interview, have your people get hold of my people. We'll get you on, tell your side of the story. Be good stuff. Yes. It's developers all over the country chanted Ballmer, Ballmer, Ballmer. Yeah, it was, and so I will say that I only had the chance to be in the room where he was speaking once, and that was an MVP summit several years ago. And I was struck by a couple of things. The guy has considerable amount of energy, which is no surprise to anybody who's looked at any of the funny Ballmer videos out there, the developer ones, or the Monkey Boy ones, or any of that kind of stuff. The guy had a bunch of energy. He was just really an energetic speaker. The other thing was he kind of looked like a big lug. He was tough to take seriously, but the guy seemed smart. I mean, he didn't seem dumb. Sometimes, for all you people watching this Netcast right now, you just get this feeling about a guy that he's really not all there. Case in point, I didn't get that with Ballmer. And the other thing that I got about Ballmer is that he didn't take himself too seriously. He knew that people joked about him, and I can't remember what it was. There were for that MVP summit, there was a group there. It was either a product group or a country group or something that had some kind of flags or stickers or something that they were sticking on themselves. And one of those guys came up and gave one to him, and he stuck it on his forehead or something. I mean, he's speaking in front of a room full of 3,000 MVPs, and he stuck something on it. I mean, the guy was just a good guy. He's no Bill Gates. Bill Gates is a heck of a guy, but I think Ballmer didn't get the respect that he wanted. And in the chat room, they are mentioning that this does, from a technical standpoint, this does have some relevance. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about how Microsoft lost a lawsuit that they can't call SkyDrive in the UK. And so they're going to have to come up with another name. And I think we all were kind of rallying around that they were going to change it to a Ballmer Drive, but now that's out. Lori Gowan in the chat room brings up another thing that Steve Ballmer actually ran with the SharePoint Runners group in Vegas at the SharePoint conference in 2009 or whenever that was. He came and did the keynote, and he had heard about the SharePoint Runners and went out and ran with them. So just a great guy. I really think the media rips him up for no good reason, but just kind of wanted to cover that because I feel like the guy doesn't get a fair shake. Okay, enough about that. Oh, and I see I did a terrible job editing my slides. I've still got some slides from last week. So let's see where that's all at. This is going to be a good time. That was last week. Oh, there we go. Okay, come back here. So we'll leave it on the Ballmer one. That slide should go away. I need to get an intern. College Town, I should be able to get interns. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was there have been a bunch of updates to my patch wikis for the last few weeks, and I just kind of wanted to highlight some of those. The August 2013 CU for SharePoint 2010 fixed some stuff. I added that. The June 2013 CU for SharePoint 2010 fixed a workflow issue that was introduced in December. So go through. When you go to one of those wiki pages, in the top left, it will show you the last modified wiki pages, so you kind of see which ones I've changed. So if you're curious what I've changed, that's the best way. Also, at the bottom of every one of my wiki pages, I have a last edited date, so you can see what I've touched the last. But there's a bunch of things out there. We've had a flurry of patches come out in the last few months. Service Pack 2, cumulative updates all around. So go out there and see if any of the problems that have been plaguing your farm, see if Microsoft has fixed those for you. My slides are all messed up. We just can't have nice things. So an article that I stumbled across here in the last week that I really liked, that I wanted to share with you all, was how to rename the search service application databases in SharePoint 2010. So any of you that have had the misfortune of sitting through a conference with me or any kind of training or anything like that know that when I build search, both in SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013, I do it in PowerShell. Not just to show off and not just because PowerShell is super cool, though PowerShell is super cool, but because if you create search inside of central admin, service app, new search service, SharePoint will create your search databases, but it'll put those dad blasted GUIDs at the end of them. And there's no easy way out of that. And nobody likes GUIDs at the end of their databases. That's the kind of stuff that gets your underwear pulled up by your coworkers and things like that. So to avoid all of that, PowerShell comes to the rescue, and I create search with PowerShell, and then I'm able to specify my database names sans GUID. So that's the way I've done all of my farms for quite a while, and it works out pretty well. The problem is some of you guys didn't hear that guidance before you created your search service application. So you have these search service applications that might have, hundreds of thousands of items in them, all kinds of great customizations and tweaks and stuff, but they got GUIDs at the end of the database names. And now you're all self-conscious about it. Now that I've brought it up, now you can't help thinking about it. And you're worried about your DBA judging you and everybody else judging you. And what you really want to do is rename those databases, but not lose all your stuff. So recently, within the last week or so, Microsoft published a TechNet article on how to rename search service application databases in SharePoint 2010 or 2013. It's already out there for 2010. But basically what it comes down to is if you've created it inside of central admin, or if you want to move your databases from one SQL instance to another. So maybe you're scaling out. Maybe search has become a really big part of your SharePoint 2013 farm, and the I/O from search in SQL has become a problem. So you want to move those databases off to another SQL instance. It's the same process either way. So I'll have a link to the article in the show notes. But essentially what happens is you pause everything, pause all the search stuff, rename the databases or back them up and restore them to your other instance. Go into PowerShell and execute a bunch of PowerShell. You've got a bunch of different pieces of search, and each one of them has their own little PowerShell thing, and then you turn search back on. It finds the databases and everything starts working. So the moral of this story is that PowerShell is always the answer. If you want to do it right the first time, you build it with PowerShell. If you did it wrong the first time and you need to get bailed out, PowerShell's the thing that's going to bail you out. But that's a really good read. Also in SharePoint 2013, all the tweaking that you do with search, changing your topology and changing databases and all that kind of stuff is all done with PowerShell. And it's really odd, the function. PowerShell itself is not odd, but the steps that you have to go through are odd. So it's good to just kind of refresh your memory, read a blog post like this one, just kind of go, oh yeah, that's right, that's how we add an admin database, whatever. Just a good thing to read through. So again, there'll be links to that in the show notes, and you can read that. So this next one, and I think I have a slide for this one. Yeah, there's that. Oh, hey, have you heard the SharePoint 2010 SP2 ISO is out? This just in, breaking news. Boy, I don't have a slide for that one. I did terrible with my slides tonight. Oh, here we go. Terrible at this. So this was an interesting thing. One of the phrases that I talk about when I'm troubleshooting is that it's always permissions, and I think Eric Harlan is one that likes to say that too. It's always permissions. So a couple of weeks ago, Brian LaLancette, I think in Twitter, was talking about some stuff, and he was having some problems, and I got to use the line, "It's always permissions." And I can't remember specifically what his problem was, though Brian has lots of problems. But technically what his issue was, but it reminded me of just a troubleshooting step that I like to use when I'm troubleshooting things. And this has bailed me out of a bunch. A good example of this is I had a problem where, yep, that's the one, Vlad, where you've got an app. So that was his, okay. So if you're opening your ULS logs and you're watching things go by and you don't have any entries for anything but the timer job service, for instance, that's a good one. So you're doing something, you go into your ULS logs and there's no web app entries in there. So that was one that when I first started doing this, it's always permissions. So when this happened to me, Shane and I were at a conference and we were going to be demonstrating something, so we were going through our demos and there was nothing in the ULS log to show. And so that's when Shane and I were talking about it's always permissions. So what we did, we thought it was permissions. In our head, we were like, all right, something doesn't have permissions to write to the ULS log or something, somewhere, something. So for the VM that wasn't working, I went in and I made every account a local administrator. And in that case, it was also a domain administrator because it was all one box. But I went in and I made the install account was already a domain admin, the farm account, the web app account, the service app account, everybody was a local admin. And then I rebooted the box. And that's an important bit because the way Windows works is that once an account logs in, it gets this list of all the stuff that it can do, and it keeps that as long as it's logged in. So if I give the web app account local admin, but it's already logged in, it doesn't know it's a local admin. It doesn't check that it's a local admin. So I do all that. While that box is rebooting from all of its new permissions, I go into SQL and I make every SharePoint login a sysadmin. So basically that means that every account can do anything it needs to on the SQL box. Now obviously this isn't to fix the problem. This is only to troubleshoot the problem, because when everything comes back up and when you log back in and you fire up, in this case, the ULS log viewer, and you have results in there, you have log entries from your web apps, then you know it was permissions. It's always permissions. So then at that point, then you start pulling things out. You start taking the permissions away from things, rebooting, and then find out where it breaks. And in the case that I had, when this first happened, I don't think this was the case with Brian's, but the case that I had was this was a domain controller, the permissions were locked down. The SP web app account didn't have permission, wasn't in a group or something that needed to be. And actually that was what Brian's was too. His web app account wasn't in the performance tuning group or something like that, so it had some problems there. So that's my troubleshooting step. If you think it's something like this, you think it's permissions based, make everybody a local admin, make everybody a sysadmin in SQL, reboot everything, and then check everything. So that was a good one. So I did realize I skipped over part of my notes. Oh my goodness, it's like my first Netcast all over again. Hey, look, SharePoint 2010 SP2's out. Okay, so this was something. I apologize to you guys. I'm all over. This was so for the last month or so, I've been talking about how I'm teaching an online SharePoint 2013 admin class, and that I'm doing it like the second week of September. Well, it turns out I'm not doing it the second week of September. I'm doing it this week. And I found out Friday, for some reason, and I don't know how this is, and I'm not going to point fingers, but somehow I had it in my head that it was that second week of September. And last week we were talking about some logistics, getting our GoToMeeting accounts going. And somebody in this long string of 10 or 15 emails made some mention to next week. And I kind of let it go. And then like 3 emails later, I'm like, you said next week. Why did you say next week? I'm not doing it until the end of September. And then I went to the web page and it was this week. So anyway, I'm teaching this class, this online class. And we got some great discussions today. So I wanted to talk about one of the things that we discussed. One of them is we have one of the guys in the class who's got a farm in one country and wants to have a farm in another country, actually another continent across the ocean. And you know the folks in Australia, and nothing against folks from Australia. I know like 2 or 3 decent folks from Australia, so they're not all bad. But they were whining about performance, so he was asking if he could do some crazy geo-replication stuff. And so I talked to him and I said, here's the thing. We're going to have this really long discussion. It's going to take like 5 or 10 minutes, but I want you to understand that you're just going to be disappointed. The key to this discussion is SharePoint is going to disappoint you. SharePoint doesn't like geo-replication, so we're going to talk for a bunch of time, and it's going to be easy to get lost in all the words coming out of my mouth, but I want you to walk away with one thing. SharePoint's going to disappoint you. And so then we went on. And so basically, I shattered every dream that he had of fixing this problem. He had ideas about putting web front ends in Australia, and I told him how that wasn't going to work. I told him he was going to set up another farm and do some kind of crazy SQL replication in the background. That doesn't work either. So we had this discussion. But here's kind of the bullet points from it. For SharePoint, every server in SharePoint, every server that SharePoint's going to talk to, and that's all the SharePoint servers, the SQL servers, the AD controllers, all that kind of stuff, have to be within a LAN link of each other. So then people say, well, what's a LAN link? LAN can mean blah, blah. So Microsoft has defined it. All of the servers need to have an average of less than 1 millisecond ping time, 99.99% of the time over 10 minutes, and the bandwidth needs to be at least 1 gigabit. So there's no more what's a LAN, all that kind of stuff. And once you keep in mind that these electrons that are going down these wires are moving at the speed of light-ish, do a little bit of math, that 1 millisecond ping time gives you about 40 miles, roughly. Wasn't going to work from Australia to anywhere. So that was out. That was out. Jason in the chat room saying his local loopback doesn't do that half the time. You might have that on 10 megabit to half duplex. You should check that out. So the other thing that he wanted to have multiple farms and do some crazy SQL trickery in the background to sync things up. And I explained to him that once again, disappointment was how he was going to come out of this. And and I talked to him a little bit about how SharePoint really hates it if anybody diddles with the databases behind its back. And that can be you in Query Analyzer fixing SQL in some sort, or that could be some kind of thing in the background swapping those databases out. So specifically, I gave him an example that if he was doing this with a content database, and really what other kind of database would he do it with, when you attach a content database to SharePoint, one of the things that it does is it interrogates that site or the content database for all the site collections that exist inside of there, and it puts those entries in the config database. So when I hit a SharePoint farm and I go to a place, the first thing that SharePoint wants to do is figure out which content database the pages that I'm requesting are in, and it does that by looking in the config database and then sending going out to that content database. So the problem becomes is if the site collections in that content database change, they're either removed or added, and you don't do it through SharePoint, SharePoint doesn't know and it doesn't update that config database. So if he was doing some crazy SQL backend funny business, that's one example of things that would go wrong. That's not the only one, but that's one example. So doing that won't work. So after I dashed all of his hopes of doing something like this, then I started talking to him about solutions. So after I tore him down, I tried to build him back up. The first solution that I talked about was some kind of hardware acceleration. So that's having like a Riverbed appliance or AppRiver or whatever they're called on both ends. So one in Australia and we'll say one in Iowa. And what happens there is the people in Australia try to talk to the server in Iowa. And when the server in Iowa responds back, those appliances just compress those SharePoint packets within an inch of their lives. So they travel across that WAN link lickety-split and poof, show up in Australia. Those work okay. They're not horrible. There are varying degrees of hardware that will do that and have varying degrees of success with that. So that's one option. The other option that I told him about is there is a ton of there's not a ton, but there's several third-party solutions for that. But what I told him again was, remember, you don't get out of this without being disappointed, whether you use third-party software or not. And so I told him, there are third-party solutions that do this. AvePoint's got one called Replicator or something like that. But I told him that they all do some things really well, some things not very well. And so he needs to try several of them out and try them for a period of time and see if he can break them. Since, I've been doing SharePoint forever now, this question comes up all the time. And I've had a bunch of different customers try a bunch of different solutions. Nobody has ever said the phrase, I love this SharePoint replication software I have. It's the greatest. Has never been spoken, has never happened. So I had one. This was one that I liked. The solution did a pretty good job with content, but didn't do such a good job with the pages stuff, web parts and all that kind of stuff. So this customer they were replicating from site A to site B. If they added a document in site A, it would replicate to B. If they added one to B, it would replicate to A. That was all good. But if they edited any pages, if they would add a web part to the top of a zone in A, it would get added to the bottom of that zone in B. hilarity like that. Or if they would change the theme in A, it wouldn't change in B, things like that. There was another customer that had one set up, and they had a bunch of stuff going across, and it was working mostly okay. They weren't doing a lot of crazy stuff with their web pages, so they didn't fall for the whole beginning and ending thing. But every once in a while, the synchronization would just break. Things would quit getting copied back and forth. And the first couple times that happened, and it would happen once a month, something like that. They would go in and try to fix it and spend a bunch of time trying to figure out what was going on. And most of the time they couldn't, so they just ended up deleting the connection and reconfiguring it, setting it back up, which meant a full sync and all that. And after a while, they just kind of figured out that was the best way to do it. So there was one guy whose job it was every morning when he came in was to check synchronization, and if it was broken, blow it away and start it back up. And they were, I mean, obviously they wouldn't have asked for a product that did that, but they were okay with it. And so those are the kind of things. But there are a few solutions out there. Now, another one that I have not personally used, and this is only something that I've read, is Windows 2012 comes with a piece of functionality called branch cache. The idea is with branch cache is that you can have these branch cache servers at remote locations, and they will cache things back to the home office. SharePoint is one of the things that it can cache. I have not used it. I've read the documentation that says it will work, but I've not actually tried it, so that might be something to try too. I've got a couple of pages that I've read about it, so I'll put those in the show notes as well. Jack is asking in the chat room, is there any kind of content push publishing from within SharePoint that can be used to publish one library to another? Yeah, so there's been for a long time a thing in SharePoint called content deployment. But content deployment is not multi-master. So content deployment, and the funny thing about content deployment is you've all probably used it, whether you realize it or not. Content deployment is it's based on an API that used to be called Prime or still called Prime, who knows. But it's this idea that you have an authoring farm and a publicly facing farm. Like let's say that toddklindt.com was a hot destination on the internet, and I wanted to have those servers tweaked so that they handle all the massive amounts of anonymous traffic that they got. But I wanted to have another farm where I actually authored things. I would use content deployment. So I would create blog posts or whatever on my internal farm. Then in the central admins of these two farms, I would hook them all up. And then I could deploy the content, so the web, from my publishing farm to my production farm. The problem with that is one way, that is not multi-master, and it expects the stuff on the back end to be read-only anonymous. So it would work fine for that kind of thing, but wouldn't work for what he wanted. The other thing that I suggested to him was having multiple farms, but having like a search farm that was being federated, which I'm pretty sure you're only supposed to do that over LAN links too, but I won't tell anybody if you won't. That was another option. Put all the Australian site collections in one spot, all the Ames, Iowa locations or site collections in this farm, and they're just slow if you have to get to them. But again, the moral of the story is this topic, georeplication, is nothing but disappointment and frustration in SharePoint, and there's just no way around it that I've seen. How are we doing on time? Oh, geez. We're running low. I might have to skip that one for next time. All right, so I've got a couple of... Yeah, so Doug in the chat room is saying that they looked at the content deployment features in SharePoint 2013, and it didn't allow for enough customization. It's limited. That stuff's been around since SharePoint 2007, and it's been crap for 6 years. One of the things that I did a long time ago was I wrote some training stuff for SharePoint, and in this case it was SharePoint 2007. And one of the things they wanted me to write this module on was content deployment. Okay, I read up on content deployment. I get a couple of VMs set up. I try to do content deployment. Doesn't work. So I get like the product manager for this and emails, and I'm telling him the stuff. He's like, yeah, that doesn't work. And I'm like, but I got to write a thing on it. There's somebody else with a blue badge that's expecting me to write some stuff about this. And he got a hold of him and told him to not worry about it because it didn't work. So it's not good stuff. Okay, so a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about. number one, and I'm going to save this one for next week, and I'm going to highlight it because it's a good one. You guys are going to be happy I talk about that next week. So I've had a few questions over the last few months on why my blog isn't running on SharePoint 2013. There are many reasons for that, but I can tell you that the SharePoint 2013 servers that will host my blog are up and running. And if you knew the secret URLs and secret IP addresses, you could actually hit them. So we're getting close to getting my blog on 2013. And it's embarrassing to even talk about this. My blog would already be on SharePoint 2013, except a long time ago, years ago, in SharePoint 2010, but years ago, I broke the front page to my blog. The default ASPX page that's hosting my blog, toddklindt.com/blog/defaultspx, is broken horribly. And I've cobbled the thing together, and a bunch of stuff doesn't work on it. Like you'll notice, there's no categories web part up in the top corner. Categories doesn't work on that page for me anymore because I broke it. And so part of what is keeping me from moving up to SharePoint 2013 is that page is broken and it doesn't upgrade very well. And more importantly, it doesn't get fixed. So all of the things that are broken in 2010 and were broken probably in 2007 are still broken in 2013. So I've been trying a myriad of ways to get all the content set up correctly and get around that broken page, and it's not going very smoothly. So that's really the thing right now that's holding me back. The other interesting thing is, as I was going through my content databases and all that, so the database that is my blog, that is sitting in 2013 behind a super secret URL, was created with the SharePoint 2007 beta. So not even RTM. And if you remember back then, if you played with any of the betas, they didn't support upgrading the beta to RTM, but I found a way to do it anyway. And so that database has been updated from 2007 beta to 2007 RTM to 2010 RTM and now 2013. But in the process, that one page has just become horribly mangled, and I'm not able to convince SharePoint to fix it. So that's what's holding it up. Once I get that figured out, I think we'll be good to go. I also host all my Netcast downloads on SharePoint. I'll probably move that over sooner. That database is super huge, as you can imagine. I'll probably move that one over and get that started. But looking to do it on 2013. Also have some design plans. I'm hoping to make it suck less in SharePoint 2013. That's the big plan. Okay. This is a good one. So we talked last week about when that Windows 8.1 has an official release date. Mark your calendars, sometime October 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, whatever, is when it will be released. We found out last week that it's done, that Microsoft has got it done, that they've started shipping it around, and some screenshots and stuff have leaked out about it. Now, that's sort of interesting for us. I mean, if you're listening to this blog or this Netcast, you're probably a computer gadget freak of some sort. But remember that the Windows 2012 R2 server, Windows Server 2012 R2, is going to come out in that same cycle. So the 8.1 stuff is exciting. My Surfaces, I've been telling my Surfaces about it, and they're all very excited. They can't wait to get it. And my main daily driver machines that I've left on Windows 7, I didn't like Windows 8, and but they're going to get 8.1 when it comes out. So I'm kind of excited about that. But remember, for us SharePoint folks, Windows Server 2012 R2 will be coming out too. So that's going to be part of it. And a whole bunch of stuff, System Center pieces and all that. So that's exciting stuff. And another piece of non-SharePoint news is I just wanted to pass along, for those of you that don't already go there, one of my favorite blogs that I read all the time is the Hey Scripting Guy blog. It's Ed Wilson, and he does all kinds of PowerShell stuff. And if you don't go to that blog, you should go there. Great stuff. They have guest bloggers there. There have been a couple of guest bloggers from the SharePoint community there. John Ferringer's been there. Brian Jackett's been there. So good stuff there. Check out that website. Who knows what else might pop up there? Just saying. Good stuff. Okay. Now to the shameless self-promotion piece. Again, no Netcast next week. We talked about that. Not a lot to talk about this week. Got the book, SharePoint 2013 Administration. You'd think I'd be able to find one of these somewhere. Don't have one handy. Been having kind of an uptick in sales on the website. So if you want to order an autographed copy of that, go to toddklindt.com/pro-sp2013 and you can find out all the stuff. You can use PayPal. If you live in the U.S., I will scribble down my name on a copy, ship it to you personally. You'll love it. Next thing I got going on is the last week, the beginning of October. I will be in Stockholm, Sweden, speaking at the SharePoint Exchange Forum, SEF, the 10th anniversary of that. So if you're going to be to that, I'm doing a couple sessions. I think I'm doing one on installation and one on PowerShell or something. I don't know. But swing by. In the chat room, Jack is asking, hey, Todd, is there a way to get both the paper and the digital versions for a bundled price? Not that I know of, Jack. And Rox, Wiley, they handle all of that. I mean, you can ask them, I guess. Tell them I said it's okay. But as far as I know, there's no bundle. And this is one I'm torn on. As you can imagine, I am the consumer of many digital goods and MP3s and video downloads and all that kind of stuff. So I know where you're coming from. You're saying, I bought the book. Why in the world am I going to have to pay twice to get the digital version? I've already got the book. I'm with you, brother. I feel the same way. But then as the guy that wrote the book, I'm thinking, well, you know, back in the day, I bought a bunch of 8-tracks. I didn't get the cassettes or the CDs for free. So I'm kind of torn on that. Email them. You can buy the book at wiley.com or rox.com or something. They've got non-DRM'd versions of the book, PDF, EPUB, Mobi, and all that kind of stuff. So feel free to shoot them a line. If you want to bring me involved, I'll vouch for you. I'll tell them to give you one because it comes out of my royalties. But I wish there was a way to do it. But I don't know of one. And yes, Tim, please keep it legal. I do appreciate that. And Jason in the chat room mentioned, yeah, the SharePoint Exchange Forum this year, it's the 10th anniversary, and Joran Huisman, the guy that runs that, is an incredible host. He runs incredible conferences, and this year's conference is actually on a boat. It's on a cruise. So we're cruising from Stockholm to Helsinki, Finland, and then doing stuff on the way. So it's really cool. I'm really excited. Not so excited about the 9 hours on the plane over and the 9 hours back, but it'll be a good conference. Can't wait. There's that. So the other thing, I haven't been talking about this a lot lately, but I think it's probably time. People need to start getting this figured out. Here in, boy, what is it now, 6 months, 7 months, something like that, there's going to be a SharePoint conference. And one of those big whoop-de-doo ones that Microsoft puts on, the Microsoft SharePoint conference. So it is March 3rd through the 6th. You can go to sharepointconference.com and sign up for alerts and tweets and pins and yams and all kinds of stuff about it. It's going to be at the Venetian, which is nice. I'm just glad it's not at the Mandalay Bay, but it's at the Venetian, kind of the north end of the strip there. They haven't announced anything. They haven't announced who's speaking there or any of that kind of stuff or what the content's going to be. But if you've got travel budgets and all that kind of stuff, you want to go out there, start making that case now, talking to your bosses, asking for it for Christmas, all that kind of stuff. So sharepointconference.com. A bunch of people in the chat room are hoping to be there. I'm right there with you. I hope to be there too. I'll do whatever. So, a lot of those kind of conferences and stuff going on. So that is all I have for this week. So again, we're going to be off next week, but the week after that, we'll have some stuff. You can watch this every week, youtube.com/Todd Klindt Netcast. You can reach me on YouTube at Todd Klindt. You can email me, whatever. But keep your show ideas coming. And actually, I just remembered now somebody emailed me a topic for the show, and I forgot about it. I'll cover that next week, and I'll let everybody know. So thanks, everybody. Have a happy holiday if you're in the U.S., and if you're not in the U.S., we'll have a good next weekend anyway. Thanks. Good night.